In a dead mine shed on Copper Ridge, I found my son-in-law holding a pistol just feet from my 5-year-old grandson. 3 nights earlier, that boy had whispered to me from under a bed, begging me to come get his mother. I came. I brought a truck, a lawyer, and 30 years of paperwork worth more than his family's whole empire. Only one of us walked out of that shed. I did not know that yet, standing in the dark with my hand on the door, I stood 6 feet from it and did not open it. I want to be honest about that. I stood there and counted the way I count things when my hands need something to do besides shake. I got to 11 before I reached for the handle. 3 nights before that morning, I did not know any of it was coming. I am Garrison Truitt, 66 years old. For 31 years, I made my living reading old paper county deeds, survey plats, mineral rights, filings so faded the ink had gone the color of rust. I could tell you who owned the ground under half of Gunnison County before I could tell you what day of the week it was. That skill sat quiet in a drawer for most of my life. It did not stay quiet. Here is the piece you need before anything else makes sense. 30 years ago, I bought the mineral rights under a stretch of played-out ground on the east side of the valley back when nobody wanted them, and the paperwork cost more than the land. I never told most people I had them. There was no reason to. Then, 4 months before that January, the Halloway Resort Company filed plans with the county to run a new water pipeline down from the ridge to feed 2 new hotels. There was exactly one route the engineers could use without blasting through solid granite. It crossed my ground. Nobody at Halloway Mountain Partners knew that yet. I had not decided what I planned to do about it. That Tuesday night, I was in the garage on Larkspur Road. The house Idella and I had owned for 38 years. The carbide lamp my father carried into the Nonsuch shaft in 1951 sat on the workbench still lit, the way I kept it most nights out of habit more than need. I had a leather-bound ledger open in front of me, the same one I had carried into every courthouse basement in the state. I was not working, I was only turning pages. Our daughter Noreen was 33 years old. 3 years married to a man named Corbin Halloway, whose family owned most of the mountain above town, the ski resort. The lodge is half the real estate that had turned Crested Butte from a mining camp into something the magazines wrote about. Noreen had not called in 11 days. That was not unusual anymore, and that was the part that should have worried me more than it did. A week before that Tuesday, Corbin had called me directly, which he never did. He asked in a voice too casual to be casual whether I still held any old mineral claims from my surveying days. I told him I could not remember every filing from 30 years back, which was a lie, and he laughed and said it did not matter. He was just curious about the family business. I wrote the date down in the ledger that night. I did not know yet what the question meant. I only knew a man does not ask a question like that unless the answer is already worth something to him. The Halloways were not people you crossed by accident. Garland Halloway had built the resort out of a bankrupt coal operation 40 years back, and his wife Vivian sat on every board in the county that mattered. Corbin was their only son, and everyone in town said the same thing about him at parties, that he was lucky to have been born into it because he had never once had to prove he could build anything on his own. I had heard that said as a compliment. I never once heard it said as a warning, though I would come to think later that it should have been. At Christmas that past year, Noreen had worn long sleeves the whole visit, even though Idella keeps the house warm enough to grow tomatoes in December. When I asked if she was cold, she laughed and said she ran cold in winter, same as she always had. I noticed the way she kept turning her left wrist inward whenever she reached for something on the table. I told myself I was an old man looking for trouble where there was none. I did not ask a second question. That was my failure, and I want to say that plainly before I tell you the rest of it. Because everything that came after started with the question I did not ask. Idella came into the garage a little after midnight in her robe. She did not ask why I was still up. 40 years of marriage teaches you which questions to skip. "You're going to wear a hole in that page," she said. "Just looking," I said. She stood behind me and put her hand on my shoulder, and for a moment neither of us said anything else. Outside, the wind moved through the aspens along the fence line. I did not think about the sound the way I would later. It was only wind, I want to tell you about the day Noreen was born. Because I thought about it that night, sitting there with the ledger open to nothing in particular. She came 6 weeks early in a February blizzard, and the doctor at Gunnison Valley Hospital told us to prepare ourselves. She weighed 4 pounds 2 ounces. Idella held her for the first time and said, "She's going to be stubborn." And she was right, though it took me another 30 years to understand that stubbornness had kept that girl alive more than once, and would again. I did not know yet that it would. At 12:40, Idella went back up to bed. I stayed in the garage another 20 minutes, then followed her, leaving the carbide lamp burning the way I always did. I told myself I would sleep. I did not expect to. I was still awake, lying on top of the covers in my clothes, staring at the ceiling, when the phone on the nightstand lit up at 1:05 in the morning. I looked at the screen before I answered. It was not a number I recognized. 11 digits, a Gunnison County area code, nothing attached to a name. My first thought, the stupid, ordinary thought a man has before his world changes, was that it was a wrong number, or a robocall, or someone's phone dialing itself in a pocket. I answered it anyway. The line did not drop by accident. I want to say that first because it matters more than anything else that happened in the next 4 minutes. Somebody on the other end of that call reached out and ended it on purpose. And I did not understand that until it was already too late to do anything but sit there with the dead phone still pressed against my ear. It did not start that way. It started with breathing. Small, careful breathing, the kind that comes from someone trying very hard to make no sound at all, and almost managing it. Grandpa. I sat up so fast the mattress springs cracked under me. "Gideon, buddy, is that you? Whose phone is this?" "Mommy's old one," he whispered. "The one in her drawer. I'm not supposed to touch it." "Where's your mama right now?" A pause long enough that I asked his name twice before he answered. "She's in the bedroom." She was crying. Now she stopped. My chest went tight in a way I had not felt since I was young enough to still be surprised by fear. "Are you in your room, Gideon? Is the door shut?" "Yes, sir. I pushed my dresser in front of it, like Mommy showed me." I did not let my voice change. That was the one thing I controlled in the next 60 seconds, and I controlled it completely. "You did exactly right. You keep that dresser right where it is. Can you tell me what's happening out there?" "Daddy's loud tonight," he said. "I heard something break. A cup, I think, or a plate." "Has he ever come into your room when he's like this?" "No, sir. He doesn't come in my room." "Good. That's good, Gideon. One more thing, buddy. Did you hear what they were fighting about?" "Papers," Gideon said. "Daddy kept saying Mommy had to sign the papers. He said it a lot of times. Mommy kept saying no." I did not ask him anything else about that. A 5-year-old boy did not need to carry more of it than he already was. "You stay right there. Count to 100 for me the way we practiced. Can you do that?" I heard him start the numbers, coming out slow and careful in the dark. 1, 2, 3. I told him I loved him. He told me he loved me too, so quietly I almost missed it. And then the call ended on his side, not mine, the way it always did when he decided he had said enough to be safe. I sat on the edge of the bed, with the phone still warm in my hand. I did not call anyone in those 90 seconds. I thought about it, the county line, the state patrol, and I put the thought down each time. Because I did not yet know what I was calling about, and a man who calls the police with half a story usually gets the half that makes him look like the problem. I was already reaching for my boots on the floor beside the bed when the phone rang again. Noreen's name on the screen this time. "Noreen, talk to me." What came through was not her voice. It was something that used to be her voice, thin and broken, arriving in pieces, like she was speaking through water. "Dad." A breath. "Daddy." Another breath, ragged. "Help me." "Where are you at? Are you at the house?" "I can't, they won't." A sound behind her, something knocked over glass against wood. Then a man's voice, low, not shouting, the exact tone of someone who did not need to shout to be frightening. I could not make out the words. I did not need to. "Noreen, are you hurt? Tell me where you are." The lodge house, she said so fast the words ran together. Not the main house, the old one, behind the… Something scraped hard against the receiver on her end, like the phone had been grabbed or dropped. Nothing. Then, so faint, I leaned forward without meaning to. The land, Dad. Don't let him… The line went dead. Not the click of a dropped call or a bad signal out on the mountain roads, dead the way a door sounds when someone slams it shut on purpose from the other side. I sat there for 3 seconds. I counted them the same way I had counted the steps to the mineshed door on a night that had not happened yet. 3 seconds was the last time that whole night I sat still. Adela was already awake when I came down the hallway, standing in the bedroom doorway in her robe, her hand pressed flat against the frame, the way she did when she already knew, before I said a word, that something had gone badly wrong. That's the second call tonight, she said. Was that him? Both of them, I said. Noreen called right after. What did she say? I did not answer that yet. I was already moving past her toward the stairs, working the buttons of my shirt with fingers that were not shaking because I would not let them. Not with Idella watching. I need my boots and the keys to the truck. Garrison. She caught my arm at the top of the stairs, and for a moment neither of us moved. What did she say? She said, "Don't let him have the land." I looked at my wife in the hallway light. She wasn't asking me to save her life, Idella. She was warning me about something else, something bigger than tonight. I already knew 2 things by the time I reached the bedroom closet for my boots. I was not calling the county sheriff first, because the county sheriff played poker with Garland Halloway every second Thursday of the month, and I was not going to hand the Halloways a warning before I had 1 mile of road behind me. And I was not driving to the main house on the mountain. Noreen had said the old lodge house, the one behind the equipment barns nobody used anymore, the one I had walked past a dozen times at family gatherings without ever once asking why it still had power run to it. Idella's face did something I had only seen a handful of times in 38 years of marriage. A kind of stillness that was harder than crying. Then go, she said. I'll call Emmett. I went down the stairs 2 at a time, my bad knee complaining the whole way, and stopped at the bottom just long enough to press my palm flat against the plaster wall, the way I had done every morning for 38 years, without ever once thinking about why. Then I picked the keys up off the kitchen counter and walked out into the cold. The gate came apart in 2 pieces, one crumpling against the driveway and the other spinning off into the hedge line, and by the time it did, I had already made a decision I could not take back. That came 4 minutes after I arrived. I want to tell you about those 4 minutes first, because everything the Halloways said about me afterwards started with what happened at that gate, and none of it started the way they told it. I reached the security entrance to Halloway Mountain Partners at 2:40 in the morning. 2 stone pillars, iron bars between them, a keypad on a post to the left. A light above the left pillar lit the whole driveway white. I rolled my window down and pressed the intercom button. Static. Then nothing. I pressed it again. This is Garrison Truitt, Noreen's father. Open the gate. More silence. Then a light came on in an upper window of the main house, and a figure appeared behind the glass. Even from 30 yards I could tell it was a woman in a robe, looking down at me the way you look at something you found on the bottom of your shoe. The window slid open. Vivian Halloway's voice came down through the cold air. Precise in a way that told me she had practiced sounding calm more times than she had practiced anything else in her life. Do you have any idea what time it is, Mr. Truitt? Open the gate, Vivian. Noreen called me. I heard her. Noreen calls people when she's had too much wine and feels sorry for herself. It happens more than you'd think. She pulled her robe tighter with a small, deliberate shiver. I do feel for you, driving that old truck across the valley at your age, because your daughter can't manage her feelings like an adult. Go home. I kept my voice flat. She said Corbin wouldn't let her leave. She said something about the land. I'm not asking twice. You're not asking at all, Vivian said. You're trespassing on private property, and if you don't turn that truck around in the next 30 seconds, I will call the sheriff myself. Call him, I said. Tell him I'm coming through the gate either way. She laughed, short and cold. You people always think you're the exception. I dug the footings for half the driveways in this valley, Vivian. I know exactly what that gate is bolted into, and I know it isn't bolted into much. Open it or I'll open it myself. Is that a threat, Mr. Truitt? It's a fact. I don't make threats. I make plans. I looked past her toward the dark shape of the lodge house behind the main one. Go home, Mr. Truitt, before you embarrass yourself further. She started to pull the window shut. I put the truck in reverse. Vivian stopped moving. I watched her hand come to rest on the window frame as I backed the truck across the width of the drive, the rear bumper stopping just short of the low stone wall on the far side. "What are you doing?" she called out. "Mr. Truitt, what on earth?" I did not answer her. I put the truck in drive and pressed the pedal to the floor. 40 yards of runway. I used all of it. The engine came up loud, and rising tires shrieking against the asphalt in a sound that carried across the whole quiet mountain. And then, the impact was everything at once, steel against iron, the stone pillar cracking at its base, one gate panel folding against the driveway, and the other tearing sideways into the hedgeline I mentioned before. The truck lurched and shuddered under me, the wheel jumping in my hands, the hood buckling slightly where it caught the center post. Steam came up hissing from somewhere near the radiator. I drove straight up the driveway past a dry fountain already drained for winter to the front steps. I kicked the door open and stepped out into the steam. Vivian was screaming from the upstairs window now, her composure gone entirely, her voice raw. "You animal! Do you hear me? I am calling the police right now!" I heard her. I walked toward the front door of the main house, but it was the door of the old lodge house behind it I was headed for, the one Noreen had named on the phone. I never reached it. The front door of the main house opened first, and Corbin filled it in a gray t-shirt and boxers, his hair flattened on one side, his eyes red with alcohol and interrupted sleep. "Back up," he said, his voice thick. "You can't be here. You need to leave right now." I looked at him for exactly 1 second. "Where is she, Corbin?" "She's fine. She's resting." "This isn't—" "You told her mother she was resting 3 hours ago. Where is she?" He put both hands up, the gesture of a man trying to slow down something already moving too fast to slow. "Mr. Truitt, listen to me. This is a family matter. You need to—" "She called me and told me not to let you have the land." I kept walking toward him. "So I'd say it stopped being a family matter the minute papers got involved. Where is Mother?" Something shifted in his face when I said the word land. Not fear, exactly. Calculation. The look of a man doing fast math on how much I already knew. "You don't understand what's happening," he said. "There's a buyer. There's a timeline. If she doesn't sign by the end of the month, we lose the whole deal, and I lose—" He stopped himself. "You lose what, Corbin?" He did not answer that. His eyes moved past me, toward the wrecked gate, toward the steam still rising off my hood, and whatever he had been about to say went back down wherever he kept the things he did not say out loud. "The lodge house," he said finally low. "But you don't understand what's—" I did not wait for the rest of it. I moved past him off the front steps, cutting across the frozen grass toward the smaller building behind the equipment barns, the one with a single light burning in a window on the ground floor. Behind me, I heard Vivian's voice again, still shouting from the upstairs window. And under it, fainter, the first sound of a siren starting up somewhere down the mountain road. I did not slow down for either one. I had maybe 6 minutes before that siren became headlights in the driveway, and I intended to use every second of it. I counted the equipment barns as I passed them, the way I counted everything, 3 of them, corrugated steel, padlocked. The kind of buildings a family builds when they have more money than they know what to do with and no particular use for any of it. The lodge house sat past the last one, low and dark, except for that single lit window. And I did not slow down to admire the architecture. I had 6 minutes and I was already spending them. I pushed past Corbin, the way you move a door that is not latched properly. One hand flat against his shoulder, and he stumbled sideways into the frame without much fight left in him. "Noreen!" I called out, stepping into the lodge house. "It's Dad. Where are you?" The place smelled wrong before I had gone 10 feet. Under the cold air coming off the open front door, there was something else, sharp and medicinal. The kind of smell that belongs in a hospital corridor at 3 in the morning and nowhere in a private house. I moved toward the stairs. The smell got stronger with every step. I took them 2 at a time, my boots loud on the wood, not caring anymore how much noise I made. "Noreen! Baby, answer me!" The hallway at the top was narrow, 4 doors all closed. I tried the first. A storage room, boxes stacked to the ceiling, undisturbed. I tried the second. Empty, dark, smelled of dust. Then I heard it. The smallest sound, barely there, a soft, rhythmic scrape from behind the third door. Like someone shifting weight against a hardwood floor. I pushed it open. The room was small, sparsely furnished, a single bed against one wall, a nightstand, a lamp with no shade. A glass of water lay on its side on the floor near the bed. The water soaked into a dark stain on the wood that had gone still hours ago. Noreen was not in the bed. My eyes found her on the far side of the room, between the bed frame and the wall, curled on her side, with her knees drawn up, her cheek pressed against the floor. She was wearing an oversized shirt, a man's by the size of it. Her bare legs pale beneath the hem. Her dark hair had come loose from whatever it had been tied back with, fanned out around her head. She was breathing. I could see the small, irregular rise and fall of her ribs from the doorway. Shallow and slow, like something fighting to stay lit in a draft. That sight put me across the room faster than I had moved in 20 years. I dropped to both knees beside her, the impact sending a jolt up through my bad knee that I did not feel until much later. I put my hand on her shoulder, her upper arm, and felt it not just the thinness of her, though that alone was enough to blur my vision, but the shape of the bone itself. Her shoulder blade moving under my palm like something that had lost whatever had once protected it. "Noreen, it's Dad. I'm right here." Her eyelids fluttered. Her lips parted around a word that took a long time to arrive. "Dad, I'm here. I've got you." I got my arm under her shoulders and lifted her upper body off the floor, cradling her head against me. "Can you look at me?" She tried. Her eyes opened halfway unfocused, drifting before they found my face. When they did, something in her expression broke open. Not relief, exactly. More the particular exhaustion of someone who has held herself together for a very long time and has just been given permission to stop. "I knew you'd come," she breathed. "I kept telling myself to come." "I need you to stay awake for me. Can you do that? Keep talking to me." I checked her pulse at her wrist, out of the same old habit that had made me check load-bearing beams on every job site for 30 years. Steady enough, too fast, but steady. Her pupils were slow to track when I moved my hand in front of her face. Not what I would call conscious. Not what I would call safe. I pushed the loose hair back from her face. Her skin was cold and dry under my hand. I pulled back the sleeve of the shirt to check her arm, and what I found there took the air out of my lungs the way nothing else that night had managed to do. Bruising along the inside of her forearm. Not one mark, but several, layered over each other in different stages of healing, yellow fading into deep, ugly green. They were shaped like fingers. 4 narrow marks along the outside, one wider print from a thumb on the inside. The kind of marks that come from being grabbed and held more than once. I breathed in slow through my nose and let it back out before I trusted my voice. "Noreen, did Corbin do this to you?" Her eyes filled and spilled over at once, tears running sideways across the bridge of her nose. She nodded, small and exhausted, and I held her tighter and pressed my mouth to the top of her head and stayed like that for 3 seconds. I counted them. 3 seconds to feel everything I felt in one breath, and then I put it away because there was no room left for it that night. I got my arms under her and stood. She weighed almost nothing. I had carried framing lumber heavier than my own daughter. I had hauled concrete blocks that gave more resistance than the woman in my arms, and that fact undid me more than the bruises had, more than the smell in that room, more than anything else I had seen so far. 31 years of lifting things for a living, and nothing had ever weighed on me the way that lightness did. I carried her down the stairs and through the front room out into the cold. Vivian stood on the steps of the main house now, phone pressed to her ear, her eyes going to Noreen and staying there. Not with concern, but with the flat calculation of someone assessing a problem. "The police are on their way," she said, her voice gone quiet and precise. "You will put her down and wait. You've assaulted my son and destroyed $250,000 of property tonight, Mr. Truitt. I hope whatever you think you're proving is worth what's coming to you." I did not answer her. I carried Noreen to the truck and eased her into the passenger seat, working the belt across her without jostling her arm. Her head drooped against the headrest. "Stay awake, baby," I said, pressing my palm to her cheek. "Talk to me. Tell me what you had for dinner Tuesday." A faint, broken sound came out of her that might have been a laugh. "I don't remember, Dad. They're going to—" "I know what they're going to try," I said. "Let them try." I closed the door gently and walked around to the driver's side, my hands steady in a way that surprised even me, given everything they had just carried. I got in. I started the engine. Somewhere down the mountain road, closer now than it had been 5 minutes ago, I heard the siren rise and fall, coming for the both of us. 3 cruisers blocked the end of the driveway before I had the truck out of park. Blue and red light swept across the bare aspens and the wrecked stone pillar in alternating pulses, and 6 officers were out of their vehicles before I finished raising my hands above my head. "On the ground!" the lead officer shouted, one hand on his holster. "On the ground, right now!" "My daughter is in the passenger seat," I said loud and level. "She's unconscious. She's been drugged. She needs an ambulance before anything else." A second officer moved toward the passenger side, flashlight up, and the moment his beam crossed Noreen's face, his posture changed completely. He grabbed his radio. I lowered myself to my knees on the cold gravel. 2 officers were on me within seconds, pulling my arms behind my back, a zip tie biting into my wrists before I had a chance to take a full breath. I did not fight it. There was nothing to be gained by fighting it, and I had learned that lesson decades before that night, on job sites, where a man who argued with an inspector always came out worse than a man who waited. That was when I saw him. Off to the side of the driveway, half in shadow, near the wrecked gate, a man in a dark suit stood with his hands folded in front of him, watching the whole scene, with the patient stillness of someone who had done this before and was in no hurry at all. He was not a police officer. He was not dressed like anyone who belonged at a private residence at 3 in the morning. And he had arrived, I would come to understand later, before the first cruiser did. I did not know his name yet. I filed the face away the same way I filed away a mislabeled property line. Something that did not add up. Something I would come back to. Vivian had changed into actual clothes by the time the sergeant reached her pressed slacks and a blouse, not a hair out of place, as if she had been dressing for this moment rather than woken by it. She moved toward him with the ease of a woman who had spent decades getting people to listen to her. "That man broke down our gate," she said, her voice precise and devastatingly calm. "He assaulted my son. He attempted to abduct my daughter-in-law against her will. We have been trying to get her medical help for months, and he keeps interfering." I turned my head as far as the officer's hand on my shoulder would allow. The paramedics had Noreen on a gurney within 4 minutes. They had an IV line in her arm by minute 7. By minute 9, the ambulance doors closed and I watched it pull away, down the mountain road with its lights going, until it disappeared past the tree line and the sound of it faded into the cold. Then they put me in the car. The booking room at the county substation smelled of burnt coffee and industrial cleaner. A sergeant behind a scarred desk processed me with the mechanical patience of a man who had done this 10,000 times. He asked my name, my address, my occupation. "Retired," I said. "Mineral rights abstractor." He typed it without looking up, then stopped, glanced at the screen, glanced back at me. "Any relation to the Truitt Survey Company out of Gunnison?" That was my father's outfit. I ran it after him for 31 years. He did not say anything else about that. He looked at me a second longer than he needed to, then went back to typing. "Put him in holding," he said to the officer beside him, and then quieter, not quite to me, and not quite to himself. "Man's about to find out what it costs to make Garland Halloway look bad at 3 in the morning." I did not answer him. I filed that away, too. The holding cell was concrete, a metal bench, a drain in the floor that suggested a history better left unexamined. I sat down and put my elbows on my knees and let myself feel the full weight of the night for the first time since the phone had rung at 1:05. The guilt was the worst part. Not the cold bench, not the hum of the fluorescent light, the guilt because I had known something was wrong for longer than a year. I had seen the long sleeves at Christmas. I had heard the way Noreen's voice changed on the phone when Corbin was in the room, flatter, more careful, like someone choosing each word to avoid a landmine. I had told myself I was overreacting. I had told myself she would come to me when she was ready. At 5 in the morning, the cell door buzzed open. "Truitt," the guard said, checking his clipboard. "Lawyer's here." Emmett Sorrell was already seated in the consultation room when they brought me in reading glasses, pushed up on his forehead, a legal pad in front of him, untouched. He had been my attorney for 22 years. He looked at me the way a doctor looks at a patient who has done something inadvisable, but not entirely unexpected. "Sit down, Garrison." I sat. "Where is she?" "Gunnison Valley Medical Center. Stable. Severely malnourished, dehydrated, high levels of sedatives in her system. Nothing consistent with recreational use. Consistent with someone being medicated without their knowledge over an extended period." My hands closed into fists on the table. "And Corbin's not charged with anything yet," Emmett continued, his voice flat. "He's telling the sheriff you forced your way in and assaulted him. Vivian's supporting that account." "Of course she is." I pressed my fist against my mouth for a moment, then lowered it. "What are the charges against me?" "Criminal trespass, vandalism for the gate, assault if Corbin pushes it." He turned a page he had not written anything on yet. "Bail was denied this morning at the emergency hearing. The judge cited risk of further property destruction." "Denied. On what grounds specifically?" "On the grounds that Garland Halloway has known Judge Whitfield for close to 20 years. Emmett's voice had an edge to it now, the first I had heard all morning. "It isn't in the record. But it's the reason. I've practiced in this county for 2 decades. Garrison and I have never seen bail denied on a first offense trespass charge. Never once." I sat in that consultation room and thought about the man in the dark suit standing calm at the edge of the driveway before the first siren had even reached us. And I understood with a clarity that settled into my chest like something poured and left to set, that nothing about that night had happened by accident. Not the gate, not the sedatives, not the timing of a lawyer who somehow arrived before the police did. They had been ready for me before I ever backed that truck into reverse. Emmett set his briefcase on the table and opened it slowly, the way a man opens something he has been asked to open before he is entirely sure he wants to. "Before I file anything," he said, "I need to understand what I'm dealing with. You told the sergeant you're a mineral rights abstractor. I've known you 22 years, Garrison, and I've never once heard you use that phrase outside of tax season." "Because it never mattered before now." I asked him to reach into my jacket, since my hands were still numb from the zip ties, and pull out the small notebook folded into the inside pocket. He did. It was not the leather ledger that stayed home in the garage where it always stayed, but a slimmer working copy I carried when I traveled. Pages of filing numbers and section markers that meant nothing to anyone who had not spent 31 years learning to read them. 30 years ago, I said, I bought the mineral rights under a stretch of ground on the east side of the valley. Played out ground, nobody wanted it. The paperwork cost more than the land did. I never told anybody I had it because there was no reason to." Emmett was quiet for a moment. "And now there's a reason. Halloway Mountain Partners filed plans 4 months back to run a new water line down from the ridge to feed 2 new hotels. There's exactly one route their engineers can use without blasting through granite. It crosses my ground." I set the notebook flat on the table between us. "They don't know that yet." He studied the filing numbers for a long moment, then looked up at me over his glasses. "This isn't a defense strategy anymore, Garrison. This is leverage, enormous leverage. I know what it is. They'll fight it. Garland has relationships at the state level. The second you assert this claim, every lawyer his firm employs will be looking for a way to invalidate it. Let them look. 30 years of filings don't disappear because somebody doesn't like what they say. I leaned forward. I want you to do two things today. First, I want a formal notice of mineral rights assertion filed against that pipeline route by end of business. Second, I want to know who holds the note on the resort's expansion debt. All of it. Every mortgage, every construction loan, every line of credit Garland Halloway is servicing. And when you find out, I want to buy it, whatever it costs. Emmett set his pen down. Do you understand what you're describing? You want to become their creditor. You want to be the one they owe. I want to be the reason nothing they're building moves forward until my daughter is safe, and everyone responsible for what happened to her answers for it. Emmett was quiet long enough that I heard the fluorescent light humming overhead. I felt something move through me while I waited for him to answer something I did not have a clean name for, and did not examine too closely because examining it would have meant admitting how much I wanted to watch Garland Halloway open a mail envelope and understand for the first time in 40 years what it felt like to owe someone something he could not simply buy his way out of. I kept my face level. I did not let Emmett see any of that. A man does not get to call himself better than the people he is fighting if he lets that feeling show on his face. You understand the mechanics of what you're proposing, Emmett said finally. Buying distressed debt takes capital most retired surveyors don't have lying around. I've had 38 years to put capital somewhere it wouldn't draw attention. I have it. He did not ask me where. 22 years of representing me had taught him which questions were worth asking and which ones I would answer in my own time, if at all. I want to tell you something that happened a long time before that morning, because it explains more about me than anything I have said so far. When I was 26 years old, working my first survey job outside Leadville, I found a discrepancy in a boundary filing that would have cost the company a piece of contested ground. My supervisor told me to let it go, that it wasn't worth the fight that a young surveyor who caused trouble on his first job didn't get a second one. I let it go. Nothing terrible happened because of it, not that year. Not for a long time after. But I learned a lesson I carried for 40 years afterward, and it was the wrong lesson. I learned that staying quiet was the same thing as staying safe. I applied that lesson to my marriage, to my business, to my own daughter's silences at Christmas dinner. I sat in that consultation room and felt for the first time something close to knowing how wrong that lesson had been, and how much it had already cost. Emmett's phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at it, frowned, and turned it toward me. A text from his office. Priscilla flagged something in the archive pull you asked for last week. A labor complaint, filed 3 years ago, withdrawn 2 days later. Name on the complaint, M. Ibarra. Want me to pull the full file? Who's Priscilla? I asked. My paralegal. I had her running a background sweep on Halloway Mountain Partners' litigation history while I was driving out here. Old lawsuits, settled disputes, anything that might tell us who else has had reason to be afraid of that family. Emmett studied the message a moment longer. I don't know what this is, probably nothing. Employment disputes get withdrawn all the time when a settlement's involved. Companies pay people to disappear from a court docket more often than you'd think. Pull the file anyway. He typed a short reply, then set the phone face down on the table between us. Garrison, I want to be clear about what happens next if we do this the way you're describing. You're not just going to annoy them. You're not going to make them uncomfortable at a dinner party. You are going to attack the financial foundation of a family that has spent 40 years building relationships with every judge, every commissioner, and every lender in this county. He looked at me steadily. You're going to declare war. And once it starts, there is no version of this where you get to decide when it ends. I thought about Noreen's shoulder blade, moving under my palm like something that had lost whatever had once protected it. I thought about the marks on her arm, shaped like fingers layered in different stages of healing over what must have been months. Then I'm declaring war, I said. File the notice. Desmond Vachon kept his office on the 3rd floor of an old ski shop building on Elk Avenue. up a narrow staircase that smelled of wax and old rubber from the tuning shop below. The frosted glass on his door read only, Vashon Investigations. No tagline, no list of services. Men who were good at what he did rarely needed to advertise. He was standing at the window when Emmett and I walked in, a thick folder tucked under one arm, looking out at the ski runs cut into the mountain above town, empty of snow this early in the season. He turned when the door opened and handed the folder to me without preamble. "Sit down," he said. "This is going to take a while." I sat. I opened the folder. Corbin Halloway on paper is a mid-level land use consultant for the family company, Desmond said, moving to stand behind his desk. Good salary, corner office in the lodge headquarters. His job is signing off on environmental and geological assessments before construction permits go through the county. 2 years ago, that pipeline route you're contesting was surveyed by an outside geologist named Marisol Ibarra. I looked up from the page. Ibarra. The name from the labor complaint. Same name. I don't think it's a coincidence, and neither will you once you hear the rest of it. Desmond tapped the second section of the folder. Marisol Ibarra was 24 years old, an assistant surveyor working under contract for a firm out of Gunnison. Her job was to walk that stretch of ground and file a geological report clearing the pipeline route for construction. She filed a preliminary report 18 months ago. It never made it into the public record. Why not? Because what she found wasn't a clear route. It was a copper vein. Desmond turned the folder to a topographic survey clipped inside the cover contour lines marked in his own hand over a printed county map. Not a played-out seam, not scattered ore. A vein of native copper running close enough to the surface that a modern extraction operation could pull it economically. Ibarra's preliminary numbers put the value of that deposit somewhere north of $40 million, conservatively. I felt something settle in my chest, heavy and slow, the way concrete settles once you stop vibrating it. That land isn't worth anything because of a water pipeline, I said. It's worth everything because of what's underneath it. That's my read, Desmond said. And your mineral rights claim doesn't just block a pipeline route, Garrison. It sits on top of the one asset in this whole valley that could double the size of Halloway Mountain Partners inside a decade. Corbin has known about that deposit for at least 18 months. I'd guess Garland has known longer. Emmett, who had been quiet since we sat down, leaned forward. If that's true, why hasn't the company filed a claim of their own, or tried to buy Garrison's rights outright? Because a copper deposit that size triggers federal environmental review the moment it's formally reported. Endangered species surveys, water quality studies, a permitting process that could take 5 years and kill the resort expansion before it starts. My guess is they've been trying to find a quiet way around all of that. Buy the rights, privately, develop it under an existing land use permit, report the extraction after the fact as incidental to construction. Desmond shrugged. It's not legal. But it's the kind of not legal that's hard to prove unless somebody talks. And Marisol Ibarra was going to talk, I said. Desmond did not answer that directly. He reached into the folder and pulled out a single photograph, a printout from what looked like a county incident report. It showed a rocky slope above a logging road, a section of collapsed hillside boulders and shattered timber scattered across the roadbed below. 18 months ago, 2 weeks after she filed that preliminary report, Marisol Ibarra was killed in a rock slide while conducting a follow-up survey on that same slope. Solo assignment, no witnesses. The county ruled it an accident. Unstable terrain, recent freeze-thaw cycling, the kind of thing that happens in these mountains more often than people like to think about. He set the photograph down in front of me. This was recovered near her body and logged into evidence. It was never returned to her family. I don't know why. I got a copy of the inventory list from a contact at the sheriff's office. The photograph beneath it was smaller, grainier, clearly copied from an evidence log rather than taken fresh. A brass surveyor's compass, the housing scratched and worn from years of handling, the kind of instrument a family passes down rather than buys new. Someone had scratched initials into the underside of the lid, visible even in the poor copy. M.I. I looked at that compass for longer than I meant to. I thought about my own father's tools, the carbide lamp still burning in my garage 40 years after he stopped needing it. And I thought about a 24-year-old woman walking a slope alone with an instrument that had probably belonged to someone in her own family before her, doing a job that told the truth about what was in the ground, whether anyone wanted to hear it or not. "You think somebody arranged that slide?" I said. It was not a question. I think a geologist who found a $40 million liability walking around with proof of it in a filing cabinet is a very inconvenient person to have alive, Desmond said. I can't prove causation. Not yet. What I can tell you is that the contractor who filed the original slope stability assessment for that road, the assessment that should have flagged it as unsafe for solo survey work, was paid directly by Holloway Mountain Partners off the books 6 weeks before Ibarra died. The room was quiet except for the sound of skiers' voices drifting up faintly from the street, below tourists complaining about the lack of early snow, entirely unaware of what was sitting in a folder 3 floors above their heads. I reached into my jacket and closed my hand around the working notebook I still carried, the one with 30 years of filing numbers pressed into its pages. And I held it the way you hold something you are afraid might slip away from you, if you loosen your grip even slightly. "Emmett," I said, "I want everything Marisol Ibarra ever filed everywhere it exists. County records, her employer's archives, anything her family might still have. And I want to know if there's a pattern here. If she's the only person who ever got too close to what's under that ground." "You think there are others?" Emmett said. "I think a family that would drug my daughter to keep her quiet about land isn't going to draw the line anywhere I'd expect them to." Desmond closed the folder and slid it across the desk toward me. "One more thing," he said. "The buyer Corbin's been courting for a fast land transfer before any of this gets slowed down by a mineral rights dispute. It's not a hotel group. It's a mining consortium out of Denver. They've made 2 site visits in the last 3 months, both unlisted on any public calendar." I sat with that for a long moment, the notebook still closed in my fist, and understood that I had walked into that office thinking I was fighting for my daughter's safety. And I was walking out of it understanding that safety had never been the whole of what was at stake at all. Emmett had gotten me released that afternoon on a temporary bond over Judge Whitfield's written objection, on the condition that I surrender my passport and check in with the county twice a day. I want to mention that now briefly because it matters for what happened next. I was home. I was supposed to be safe there. That was the whole premise the county's own paperwork operated on, and it turned out to be worth exactly nothing. The knock came at 11:40 that night. And it was not a knock so much as the flat-handed impact of someone announcing entry rather than requesting it. I was in the garage when I heard it, the carbide lamp burning on the workbench, the notebook open in front of me, though I was not reading it. Idella had gone up an hour before. I turned off the lamp and walked through the kitchen and opened the front door before whoever was out there could hit it again. A man I had not met filled the doorway, broad-shouldered, early 50s, a face that had settled a long time ago into an expression that did not require anyone's cooperation. He held up a folded document. "Garrison Truitt, search warrant. Step aside." I looked at the signature line before I stepped aside. Judge Whitfield, Garland Holloway's judge. They came in fast, 6 officers spreading through the ground floor with the practiced efficiency of people who had done this before and enjoyed it more than they should have. They went through the kitchen drawers, the hall closet, the cabinet under the bathroom sink. One of them pulled every book off the shelf in the front room and left them in a loose pile on the floor, not because a person could hide anything meaningful behind a row of paperbacks, but because it was a way of telling me something without saying it out loud. The man with the warrant, Detective Colt Brannigan, according to the badge clipped to his jacket, stayed near the front room, watching me with the particular carelessness of a man who had already decided I was not worth being careful around. "What are you looking for?" I asked, keeping my voice level, my hands flat on the kitchen counter. "Whatever's here to find," Brannigan said. "There's nothing here to find." "We'll see about that, won't we?" They found it in 12 minutes, or rather one of them put it there in 12 minutes, which is not the same thing, but looks identical from across a room. A young officer in his 20s, buzz-cut, careful about where he kept his hands, crouched beside my recliner near the window. He made a show of checking under the cushion. When he straightened it, he was holding a clear plastic evidence bag containing a quantity of white powder that had not been in my house when I sat down in that chair 3 hours earlier. "Sergeant, got something over here." Brannigan crossed the room, took the bag with a gloved hand, turned it slowly under the lamplight, with an expression of theatrical disappointment he had clearly rehearsed somewhere before arriving. "Well," he said, "looks like we found out where your daughter's habit came from, Mr. Truitt." Idella appeared at the top of the stairs. I had told her before any of this started to stay up there if anything ever happened again. She had chosen not to listen. She stood on the landing in a robe, one hand on the banister, looking down at Brannigan with an expression I had seen on her face only a handful of times in 38 years of marriage. A cold, absolute fury. She was keeping perfectly still the way you keep a fire contained by refusing its air. "That is not my husband's," she said. Her voice did not shake at all. "Ma'am, I need you to stay upstairs while we complete the search." "That is not my husband's," Idella said again, in exactly the same tone as though he had not spoken at all. I watched her right hand resting against the banister, and I saw it move, slow, unhurried, sliding into the pocket of her robe and coming back out with her phone held low against her hip, angled toward the room below. She did not raise it. She did not need to. 31 years of teaching elementary school had taught her exactly how to record something without ever once looking like she was recording it. Brannigan looked up at her, then back at me. I let my eyes move just briefly, deliberately, to the smoke detector mounted in the corner above the bookshelves, its small red light blinking steady in the dim room. Brannigan followed my gaze. He stared at that detector for 2 full seconds, then crossed the room in 4 strides, reached up and tore it off the ceiling. He dropped it on the hardwood and brought his boot down on it twice. The plastic casing shattered. "Get him out," he said, and his voice had changed. The rehearsed calm gone, replaced by something tighter. "Get him out, right now." They put me in zip ties again. They walked me out through my own front door for the second time in a single day. Idella stood at the top of the stairs, both hands gripping the banister now, tears running straight down her face without a sound, but she did not crumple, and she did not look away. At the door I stopped, and the officer behind me pressed a hand between my shoulder blades, but I held for 1 second and looked back at her. "Keep the lamp lit," I said. "I always do," she said. They walked me out into the cold. The second holding cell was identical to the first, same fluorescent hum, same concrete bench, same drain in the floor that suggested a history better left unexamined. I sat down and put my elbows on my knees. I did not think about the powder that had never belonged in my house. There was no point in that. A man can spend a night being angry about a lie, or he can spend it doing something useful, and I had learned a long time ago on job sites which of those 2 choices actually moves a project forward. Instead, I thought about Idella's hand sliding out of her robe pocket, with her phone held low against her hip, angled toward the room, steady the whole time Brannigan was shouting orders at his own men. 31 years of managing a classroom full of children who thought they were being clever had taught my wife exactly how to hold a phone so that no one in a room ever noticed she was holding it. I did not know yet whether it would matter whether the angle had been right, whether the light had been good enough, whether Brannigan's man had done what he did in frame or just out of it. I only knew that a man who believes silence keeps him safe eventually learns that the opposite is true, and that my wife, without a word from me, had spent 38 years learning the same lesson right alongside me. The cell door buzzed open at 6:15 in the morning. "Truitt," the guard said, checking his clipboard. "Lawyer's here again." The consultation room was the same table, the same humming light, but this time Emmett did not sit down. He stood at the head of the table with a tablet in his hands, and he pressed play without saying a word. The footage was Idella's, pulled from her phone and cleaned up by someone on Emmett's staff overnight. The angle was low, unsteady in the way a phone held against a hip always is, but clear enough. It showed the front room of my own house, the recliner by the window, the bookshelf half emptied onto the floor. It showed a young officer with a buzz cut reach into his jacket pocket. It showed him remove a clear plastic bag, glance once over his shoulder toward the kitchen where Brannigan had been standing, with his back turned, and slide it under the cushion of my recliner. The timestamp in the corner read 11:51. 4 minutes later, on a second clip, the same officer straightened up and announced he had found something, his voice landing exactly the way it had landed in my own living room the night before. Except now, there was a record of everything that had happened in between. Emmett set the tablet down on the table and looked at the booking sergeant, who had come in to observe because Emmett had specifically requested a supervisor be present before he pressed play. The sergeant was a different man from the one who had processed me 2 nights running, older, with the look of someone who understood immediately that he was watching his department's morning get significantly worse. He asked to see it a second time. He watched it without saying anything, his jaw working slightly, and when it ended, he set the tablet down himself, more carefully than the situation seemed to require. "You have 5 minutes to process my client's release," Emmett said. His voice was the voice of a man who had already won, and was simply allowing the other side time to catch up to that fact. "After that, I file a federal civil rights complaint against this department and Detective Brannigan personally. I send this footage to every news outlet in the state, and I add evidence tampering to the mineral rights filing we submitted yesterday, which will be sitting on a district judge's desk by 9 o'clock this morning." The sergeant did not argue. He picked up the tablet, watched the 12 seconds of footage one more time himself, and walked out without a word. "How many copies exist?" I asked. 3, Emmett said. "My office server, a secure cloud account under privilege protection, and a physical drive in my safe. I had it uploaded before I ever came in here, in case anyone got any ideas about what should happen to a lawyer's tablet between the parking lot and the front desk. I was out in 8 minutes. They gave me back my belt, they gave me back my keys. The young officer with the buzz cut was nowhere in the building, and Brannigan's cruiser was gone from the lot. I did not ask where either of them had gone. I already understood, standing in that hallway, that whatever came next for those 2 men had very little to do with me and a great deal to do with how quickly Garland Holloway could distance himself from what they had done in his name. I want to say something here about the difference between the last 2 nights, because it is the only piece of this whole ordeal I have ever been fully certain of. The first time I was arrested, silence had put me in that cell, my own silence, the kind I had practiced my whole life, the kind that had let a bruise go unquestioned at a Christmas table. The second time, it was a recording that got me out. Not a threat, not a favor called in. A plain, unremarkable piece of evidence, made by a woman who had decided, without asking anyone's permission, that the truth was worth more than the risk of being caught holding it. I did not understand yet how much that lesson would matter before the week was over. I only knew, standing in that hallway with my belt in my hand, that something in me had shifted in a direction it was not going to shift back from. Outside, the morning was cold and the color of old pewter, the kind of gray that sits over a mountain valley in late October before the sun finds a way through it. I stood in the parking lot for a moment. I did not say anything. I did not need to. I stood there and let the cold settle into me, my breath coming out in thin clouds that dissolved before they had gone a foot from my face. And somewhere past the county building, a truck downshifted on the grade, the sound of it rising and falling away into the quiet of a town that did not yet know what had happened inside that building overnight. Emmett fell into step beside me across the lot. "The footage is already with the district attorney's office," he said. "Brannigan will be suspended by noon, I'd guess. The officer who planted the bag has already retained private counsel, which tells us he wasn't acting alone, and he knows it." "Garland," I said. "Almost certainly. He panicked Garrison. He reached for the dirtiest tool he had, and he left fingerprints all over it." Emmett unlocked his sedan. "Which means he just handed us something we didn't have an hour ago." I got into the passenger seat. I was tired in a way that had gone past the body and settled somewhere deeper, the specific exhaustion that comes from being required to stay calm when every instinct is telling you to do the opposite. Underneath that tiredness, though, something else was building, cold and methodical and very focused. "The press is outside your house," Emmett said, starting the engine. It has been since about 4 this morning. I had already seen the alerts on my own phone while sitting on that concrete bench. The story had broken overnight. The search, the evidence, my second arrest in 24 hours. And now spreading fast across every local feed in the valley. The 12 seconds of footage that undid all of it, the narrative that had painted me as a violent old man with a grudge, had shifted sometime in the last few hours into something the reporters were still working out how to phrase. "What do you want to do?" Emmett asked. I looked out the window at the gray morning, at the mountain still holding its snowless runs above the town. And I thought about Noreen in a hospital bed 4 miles from where we were sitting, and Idella standing at the top of the stairs with her chin up while 2 men walked her husband out of their own home. I thought about a compass with the initials MI scratched into its lid, sitting in an evidence locker no one had ever returned to a grieving family. "Drive me home," I said. "I have something to say." There were 7 news vans parked along Larkspur Road by the time Emmett's sedan turned onto our street. Engines idling, satellite masts raised against a sky that still had not decided whether it wanted to be gray or blue. Reporters stood in loose clusters near the mailbox, coffee cups in hand, watching the house the way people watch a building they expect something to happen to. I counted the vans from the end of the block the way I counted everything. 8, 9. "Oh, you don't have to do this now," Emmett said. "You could wait until you've slept. I've waited long enough on things I shouldn't have waited on." I got out of the car. I did not reach my own front door before it opened. Idella was already standing there in the same green cardigan she had worn to bed, and behind her at the kitchen table sat a small woman in her 70s I had never met, a tan raincoat still on, a large handbag pressed against her side like something she needed for balance rather than storage. "Mr. Truitt." The woman stood. Her voice was soft, but not uncertain, the voice of someone who had decided to be there and intended to see it through. "My name is Opal Fenwick. I live at 411 Alpine Loop, directly across from the Holloway Gate." I knew the address. It was the small house with the porch light and the camera I had noticed 3 nights before, the one I had been thinking about in a cell not 12 hours earlier. "I've seen things I should have reported a long time ago," she said. "I didn't because I was afraid of Garland Holloway. I'm not afraid anymore." We sat at the kitchen table, the 3 of us, under the same warm light that had been burning since before I was born, to this valley's understanding of what family meant. Opal talked for the better part of 40 minutes. She had watched Noreen stand alone in the side yard some evenings, arms wrapped around herself, staring at nothing for the better part of an hour. She had watched Corbin grab Noreen by the arm in the driveway once and drag her toward the house the way you drag something rather than someone. She had watched Gideon sit on the porch steps on a Sunday morning in his pajamas crying quietly, with no one coming out to check on him. She had seen Garland's own car in that driveway on a Tuesday afternoon, when the family should have been at the resort, and through her upstairs windows, she had watched him standing close to Noreen with a finger raised near her face and Noreen's hands up in front of her chest, not fighting, just bracing. "I called the non-emergency line once," Opal said, both hands wrapped around a coffee cup she had not drunk from. 8 months ago, after I saw Corbin push Noreen into a doorframe hard enough that she stumbled. The officer who called back told me the Halloways were a respected family and that marital disagreements weren't generally a matter for intervention unless there was a physical injury requiring medical attention. She looked up. He asked if I was certain of what I'd seen. The way he asked it made me feel like I was the one doing something wrong. Idella made a sound, short and involuntary, somewhere between a breath and a word. She reached across the table and covered Opal's hand with her own. "You are not doing anything wrong," Idella said. "You are doing exactly the right thing right now." Opal's eyes filled. She blinked hard, fighting it. And then she opened her handbag and drew out a small external hard drive, her hand shaking slightly as she set it on the table between us. 14 months of security footage, from a camera mounted above her own front porch, angled across the road at the Holloway Gate and the first 30 feet of their driveway. I looked at that drive for longer than I meant to. I thought about the version of myself who had stood at a Christmas table 2 years earlier and noticed long sleeves in December and said nothing. And I understood, sitting across from a woman who had waited 11 years to say what she had just said, that I had no particular right to feel superior to anyone's silence. I had practiced my own for far too long to judge hers.
"Mrs. Fenwick," I said, "if this goes to court, and it will, are you willing to testify to what you've told us tonight?"
Opal straightened in her chair and picked up her coffee cup with a hand that had gone steady. "Mr. Truitt, I've been waiting 11 years to say these things out loud. You couldn't stop me from testifying if you tried." I gave the reporters outside 20 minutes to gather before I walked out to meet them. I stood on my own front porch, straightened my jacket, and waited for the noise to settle before I spoke. Then I told the valley exactly who the Halloways were. Not with anger, not with tears. With documents, Emmett's filings, Desmond's photographs, dates and account numbers, and the name of a young woman who had done nothing but try to survive a marriage, while the people around her quietly took her life apart, piece by piece. I held up copies of the mineral rights filing. I read the timestamp off the footage that had gotten me out of a jail cell that morning, though I did not name Idella as its source. Not yet. Not until Emmett had finished making sure that naming her would not put her at any greater risk than she was already carrying. I spoke for 4 minutes. I did not take questions. I went back inside and closed the door before anyone could shout one at my back anyway. By noon, according to Emmett's phone, Garland Halloway's name was trending across every platform in the state, and 2 local stations had already run footage from a copy of the drug planting recording that someone in the district attorney's office had apparently decided the public deserved to see sooner rather than later. I was still standing in the kitchen, the coffee Idella had poured me gone cold and untouched, when my phone rang. A number I did not recognize, a Timberline Recovery Center exchange. "Mr. Truitt, this is Dr. Renata Sokol. I'm a physician at Timberline Recovery Center." A pause, and something in her voice told me this call was costing her more than the words in it. "I need to speak with you about your daughter, and I don't have much time to do it." I set my coffee cup down on the counter without looking at it, and I felt the morning's brief quiet close up around me, the way a door closes when the wind finally decides which way it wants to blow. "I cannot speak freely from this location," Dr. Sokol had said on the phone that afternoon. Her voice pitched, low, clipped. The voice of someone counting down her own window of safety. "I have about 4 minutes before my next intake. The clinical documentation in your daughter's file does not match the lab results from the independent reference lab we use for confirmation testing. Her chart says opioid dependency, acute psychosis, danger to self. The lab results show none of that. What they show is a sustained therapeutic level of lorazepam consistent with daily administration over several weeks. Your daughter did not give that to herself, Mr. Truitt. The injection sites on her arm aren't consistent with self-administration." I had asked her where Noreen was. Lower level room 14, not in immediate physical danger but heavily sedated with periods of clarity that did not last. I had asked if she could get her out. Not alone, and not without documentation that protects both of us. A court order, a family petition, a physician willing to issue a counter-evaluation. If someone arrives with the right paperwork, I can make sure the correct doors are open, then quieter. And I had heard something shift in her voice. The sound of a woman deciding to spend a career she had built carefully over 20 years on a single choice she could not take back. Garland Halloway's office called the facility director this morning, requesting an expedited transfer to an out-of-state program. I don't know which one or when. I would estimate we have less than 48 hours. Emmett had the emergency petition drafted and filed with a judge who did not play golf with Garland Halloway by 9 that evening. The order came back signed a few hours after midnight. By 4 in the morning, I was in Desmond's Tahoe climbing the gravel switchbacks east of town toward Timberline. The sky still the deep specific black that comes in the hour before dawn starts to consider arriving. Dr. Sokol was waiting at the west entrance exactly where she said she would be. A compact woman in her late 40s with the particular stillness of someone who had decided to do a difficult thing and would not permit herself to reconsider it. She did not offer a handshake. She held the door. "The night staff is 2 orderlies and a nurse at the front desk," she said, falling into step beside me. I told the nurse I needed to check on a patient. She didn't ask questions. She rarely does when I ask. The corridor smelled of antiseptic and recycled air, the particular staleness of a place where people slept in rooms without windows. My boots were loud on the linoleum. I shortened my stride without being asked to. Room 14 had a narrow rectangular window set into the door at eye level. I stopped in front of it and looked through. Noreen lay in the bed on her back, an IV line running from one arm up to a bag on a pole beside her. A single small light burning above the headboard. In that light, her face looked very young and very still, the way a face looks when someone has been pushed down into unconsciousness by something chemical rather than something natural. My hand went flat against the door. Dr. Sokol swiped her access card. The lock gave a small, clean click. I pushed the door open and crossed the room in 4 steps. Noreen! I sat on the edge of the bed and put my hand on her arm, above the IV site. Baby, it's Dad. Nothing for 2 seconds. Then her eyelids moved a slow, labored flutter, like someone surfacing from a long way down. Her lips parted. Dad. The word came out thick, dragged, like it had weight to carry across a long distance. Her eyes opened halfway, unfocused, moving across the ceiling before they found my face. When they did, something in her expression shifted. Not waking exactly, but something underneath the sedation, responding to a frequency the drugs had not managed to reach. You came, she said. I came. I need you to stay awake for me. Can you do that? I'm trying. Her free hand moved toward me, and I took it. Her fingers were cold, her grip weak, but it was there. I reached up and carefully removed the IV line. Dr. Sokol had already stopped the drip from the hallway panel, so no alarm sounded. I pressed a square of gauze over the site and bent Noreen's arm to hold it in place. Can you sit up? I think so. She made it halfway before her arms gave out, and I got mine behind her shoulders and brought her the rest of the way. She swayed. I held her. You're okay. I've got you. I got her to her feet. She could stand, barely leaning into me as we started toward the door. In the corridor, Dr. Sokol's expression had gone from watchful to alert. 2 orderlies were coming toward us from the far end of the hallway, with the automatic purposefulness of men responding to movement they had not authorized. Dr. Sokol stepped in front of them before they reached us, drawing herself up to a height that was not in itself considerable, and looking at both men with the flat authority of someone who had spent 20 years being the most competent person in any room she occupied. I am the attending physician on this patient, she said. I am issuing a clinical discharge based on my independent assessment that continued sedation constitutes a risk to patient welfare. If either of you interferes with this discharge, I will have your certifications reviewed by the State Medical Board before the end of the business week. The 2 men looked at each other. They looked at Noreen sagging against my side. They looked back at Dr. Sokol, and whatever calculation ran through both of them landed in our favor. They stepped aside. There's something else, Dr. Sokol said, walking fast beside us now, toward the west entrance. I pulled the intake logs for this wing before I called you. Noreen isn't the only patient on this floor with a file that doesn't match the lab work. There are 2 others. Different last names, different referring physicians, but the same pattern. Sedative levels inconsistent with the diagnosis on the chart. No original attending notes, only a signed intake form and a request for expedited placement from a family member with financial standing. She glanced at me. I don't think this is one case, Mr. Truitt. I think it's a method. I think somebody in this county has done this before. More than once, and gotten away with it cleanly enough to try it a 3rd time without much worry. I did not say anything to that right away. I was thinking about a family that had already shown me twice in 4 days exactly how far they were willing to reach when something inconvenient stood between them and what they wanted. A method was not an accident. A method was a thing built on purpose, refined, used again because it had worked the first time. Names, I said. I need the other 2 names, Dr. Sokol, even if you can't give them to me tonight. I'll find a way, she said. Soon. I walked my daughter out into the pre-dawn dark and helped her into the passenger seat of Desmond's Tahoe, wrapping my jacket around her shoulders because she had started shivering and the morning was cold enough to see our breath. She leaned her head back against the seat and closed her eyes, breathing slow and uneven but steadier by the second. The way breathing gets when whatever had been suppressing it finally starts to let go. Desmond drove. The Tahoe moved through the dark hills east of town, headlights cutting a narrow channel through stands of aspen, not yet bare. The heater running low against a cold that had gotten into the cab despite it. Neither of us said much for the first 10 minutes. I let the quiet sit there. Some things a person has to decide to say on their own schedule, not yours. Dad. Noreen's voice, when it finally came, was low, and she stopped there, the word hanging by itself for a moment, before she tried again. There's something I need to tell you. About Marisol Ibarra. I went very still. You know that name, I said. It was not a question. I know that name. She pulled my jacket tighter around her shoulders and looked out the windshield at the dark rushing past. She started to speak again, stopped herself a second time, her jaw working the way it does for someone deciding whether a thing is safe to let out of its cage once it's loose. Desmond kept his eyes on the road and said nothing, driving like a man who understood his job right now was to be invisible. About 18 months ago, Noreen said finally. I was at the lodge house one night. Corbin didn't know I was still awake. I'd come down for water. And I heard him on the phone in the study arguing with someone. His voice was different than I'd ever heard it, scared almost. I stood outside the door and I listened because something in the way he was talking made me want to know. Who was he talking to? Garland. She said the name flatly, like something she'd practiced saying without flinching. He kept saying, "She's not going to let this go. She's going to report it. We have less than 2 weeks before she files." And Garland, I could hear him too. Corbin had him on speaker. Garland said, "Then we make sure she doesn't file." Just like that. Like he was talking about a permit application instead of a person. I kept my hands flat on my knees. I kept my face forward because if I let myself feel the shape of what I was hearing, all at once I was not certain I would be able to keep driving my own thoughts in a straight line. Somewhere underneath the calm I was holding on to with both hands, something had gone very cold and very quiet, the way concrete goes quiet in the hours before it sets. They didn't say her name that first call, Noreen said. But 2 days later, Corbin was on the phone again, later at night, and this time I had my old phone in my bag, the one with the panic app you installed years ago after I got married, in case I ever needed it, and couldn't say so out loud. I don't fully know why I triggered it. I think some part of me already understood what I was about to hear needed to exist somewhere outside my own memory. Her voice thinned to almost nothing. That call, they said her name. Marisol. They talked about a slope and timing and a contractor Garland trusted. I didn't understand all of it that night. I understood enough. I sat with that for 3 full seconds. I counted them the way I count things when the alternative to counting is losing hold of something I need to keep hold of. You've had a recording of that call for 18 months, I said, and I kept my voice level. Level in the specific way a man keeps his voice level when what he actually wants is to put his fist through the dashboard. I didn't know if it caught anything clearly. I didn't listen to it again after that night. I couldn't. She turned to look at me, and in the thin gray light beginning to show along the eastern ridgeline, I could see her face had changed from what it had been 2 days earlier on that bedroom floor. Something had come back into it, something that had been pressed flat for a very long time. When I told Corbin I was thinking about going to the police, about something else entirely, about what he was doing to me, that was when the doctor's appointments started. That was when the pills started showing up in things I ate and drank that I hadn't put there myself. That was when they started building the file on me. I think some part of him has always been afraid I knew more than I was saying. He was right to be afraid of that. Neither of us spoke for a while after that. The road climbed and dropped beneath us. Desmond's headlights swept across a stand of bare aspen and back to the pavement. The heater ticked. A mile marker slid past unreadable in the dark. Outside, the sky had gone from black to the deep gray blue that comes just before a mountain morning decides what color it intends to be. And none of the three of us said a single word for close to a mile.
Because there's some things a car full of people can only sit inside of together in silence before anyone is ready to touch them with language again. Noreen.
Do you still have the phone? The old one?
It's in my drawer, at Corbin's house. She caught herself on the word, the way you catch yourself on a name that no longer means what it used to.
Does it have anything on it from that night?
She was quiet a moment. I triggered the panic app. I don't know if it was still recording by the time they said her name. I don't know if it caught the whole thing.
It records until it's manually stopped, I said. And it uploads automatically to a server I control. Whatever it caught that night is sitting on that server right now, Noreen. It has been the entire time.
She stared at me. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. You don't have to decide anything about it tonight, I said.
Not what to do with it, not who to tell, not when. That's yours to decide, not mine. I've spent too much of your life deciding what was safe for you to know. I'm not going to start deciding what's safe for the world to know on your behalf, too.
She turned her face away from me and pressed the back of her hand against her mouth. Her shoulders shook once, hard, and then she pulled in a long, uneven breath and let it out slow.
We go home first, I said. Your mother needs to see you're safe. Then we figure out the rest of it together. Desmond pulled onto Larkspur Road as the sky finished turning from gray to the palest wash of blue, and ahead of us through the bare branches of the fence-line aspens. The garage light was still burning small and steady, the way it had burned every single morning of my adult life, whether or not anyone had needed it to. We had been home a little over 3 hours. Noreen was at the kitchen table with a bowl of soup Idella kept warm on the stove the way she'd kept it warm for 2 days running. And I was on the back porch with a cold cup of coffee, when my phone buzzed with a call from the front office at Gideon's elementary school.
Mr. Truitt, this is Marlene at the front desk at Crested Butte Elementary. I have you listed as an emergency contact for Gideon Halloway.
A pause, the particular careful pause of someone choosing words meant to sound calmer than the situation warranted. His father arrived about 20 minutes ago and signed him out early. I tried Mrs. Halloway first, Noreen, but there wasn't an answer, so I moved down the list.
How did he seem? I asked.
Corbin, how did he look? Agitated, honestly. He was in a hurry. Signed the log wrong the first time and had to redo it. His hands were shaking pretty badly now that you ask. Marlene's voice tightened. I probably shouldn't say this, but he didn't seem like himself. I almost called the sheriff's office myself before I decided to try the family list first.
You did the right thing calling me, I said.
If he comes back or calls you, call me first. Not the school directory, me. I set the coffee cup down on the porch railing hard enough that the ceramic cracked against the wood. I turned and looked through the kitchen window. Noreen was still at the table, both hands wrapped around her bowl, Idella talking to her low and steady. I did not want to be the one to put the next hour into that kitchen before it had to arrive. I called Desmond from the driveway instead of going back inside. Corbin picked Gideon up from school 20 minutes ago, I said. Can you find him? Working on it. I heard keys clicking on his end fast. I've had a location app running on Gideon's tablet since the day I started this case, standard precaution. The tablet stays in his backpack, which stays with him more often than not. A pause longer than 60 seconds felt like it should be. Got him. The signal's not moving. It's parked off County Road 11 up past the old equipment yard on the east side of the valley. I knew that road. I had walked every foot of ground on either side of it 30 years earlier, with a transit and a set of stakes. Back when the mining company that used to own that stretch was still pulling ore out of the mountain instead of leaving rusted sheds behind for weeds to grow through. That's the old nonsuch claim, I said. There's nothing out there but equipment sheds nobody's used in 40 years.
Garrison? Desmond's voice had gone careful.
Garland's cooperation deal with the DA went public an hour ago. It's already on 2 local stations. If Corbin's watching the news the way everybody else in this valley is watching it right now, he knows exactly how this ends for him. A man who's just watched his own father trade him away for a lighter sentence is not a man making good decisions about what to do next.
I'm aware.
Let me call this in. Sheriff's Department, State Patrol. Somebody with a badge and training for this.
Call it in, I said. I'm not waiting for them to organize a response before I know my grandson is safe. I went inside through the back door instead of the kitchen, moving quiet enough that neither Noreen nor Idella looked up from the table. I went to the hall closet top shelf, behind a box of Christmas ornaments neither of us had touched since last December, to the small, fireproof lockbox I had kept there for 11 years, and opened perhaps 4 times in all that span. I took out what I needed. My father's old revolver, a Smith & Wesson I hadn't fired since a hunting trip with Noreen's late uncle, the better part of a decade back. My hands were steady as I checked the cylinder. 6 rounds. I put it in the inside pocket of my jacket against my chest, where I could feel the weight of it with every step. I came back through the kitchen doorway on my way to the front door. Idella looked up and found my face the way she always did, and read the whole of it in about half a second. Her jaw tightened. She did not ask. 38 years of marriage does not require a man to explain himself in a moment like that one only to come back. She gave me one small nod. Behind her, through the open door to the garage, the carbide lamp still burned on the workbench where it had burned every night of my adult life. And I watched her eyes go to it for just a moment, the way a person looks at something steady when everything else around them has stopped being steady at all. I went out to the Silverado. County Road 11 ran east out of town, climbing through switchbacks that had not seen new pavement since before Noreen was born. And I took them faster than my father's old truck was built to be taken. The tires singing thin against the cold asphalt, the mountains closing in, dark and close on either side of the road. I passed the turnoff for the ski runs, then the last of the newer construction, then nothing but bare aspen and old fence line for 3 miles running. Desmond called twice on the way out. I let both calls go to voicemail. There was nothing he could tell me in that stretch of road that would change what I was already driving toward, and I did not trust myself to keep the truck steady while also keeping my voice steady on a phone. The non-such equipment yard sat at the end of a rutted access track behind a chain-link gate that had been standing open unlocked for longer than anyone had bothered to fix it. Corbin's car was parked crooked beside the largest of the 3 sheds, its driver door still hanging open, the engine ticking as it cooled. I pulled the Silverado to a stop 20 yards back and got out into air that smelled of cold dust and old rust. The shed door stood half open, the darkness inside it total, except for a thin bar of afternoon light falling across the concrete floor. I stood 6 feet from it and did not open it yet. I stood there and counted, the way I count things when my hands need something to do besides shake. I got to 11 before I reached for the handle. The door swung inward on a hinge that had not been oiled since before I retired from surveying work, and there they were, exactly the way I had told you at the very start of this. The shed was larger inside than it looked from the yard, its walls lined with rusted ore carts and a collapsed conveyor belt nobody had bothered to haul away when the claim went dormant 40 years back. Corbin sat on an overturned equipment crate near the back wall, a pistol resting on his right knee, pointed at the floor rather than at anyone. His dress shirt hung untucked, his tie gone somewhere between the school parking lot and here. In the far corner on a folded canvas tarp, Gideon sat with his legs straight out in front of him, still in his little school uniform, watching me with the particular stillness of a child who has been through something and has not yet decided whether it is over. "Grandpa." His voice came out thin, steady, 5 years old, in a mine shed with a frightened man. And he had held himself together the entire time. That, more than anything else in that shed, was the thing that nearly broke me. "Hey, buddy." I kept my eyes on Corbin, but I put everything warm I had left into my voice for the boy's sake. "I'm here. You did so good." Corbin's eyes came up to meet mine, red-rimmed, raw. The eyes of a man who had run out of road and had not yet worked out what stopping felt like. "How did you find me?" he said. His voice cracked somewhere in the middle of the sentence. "I've walked every foot of ground in this valley, Corbin. There's not a lot of places left that I don't know." I kept my hands visible,
my voice easy, the same tone I used to use on job sites when something had gone sideways, and panic would only make it worse. That's not what matters right now. What matters is that boy is 5 years old and scared, and I'd like to take him home. A long silence. Somewhere above us, wind pushed against loose sheet metal on the roof, a slow, groaning creak. Dust hung visible in the single bar of light coming through a gap in the wall above his head, drifting slow, the way dust does in a place nothing has disturbed in a long time. It's over, isn't it? Not a question. Yes, I said. It is. Garland called me. Corbin's voice cracked down the middle, this time all the way through. Told me he was cooperating, his own son. He left me. Said it was the only choice he had. A sound came out of him that might have started as a laugh and lost its way somewhere before it finished. 36 years old, and my own father sold me out to save 18 months off a plea deal. He left me. I know, I said. Put the gun down, Corbin. Let the boy come to me. He looked down at the pistol on his knee, as though he had forgotten it was there. Then back up at me. Then over at Gideon in the corner. Something moved through his face that I did not try to put a name to, some private accounting a man does with himself in the last minutes before he decides what kind of man he is going to be remembered as. You know what the worst part is? He said quieter now. I actually thought there was a way to fix it. I thought if I could just get the deed transferred before the federal review started, before anyone had to know what was really under that ground, everything else would sort itself out. Nobody would have to know how it started. I told myself that every single day for 18 months. I got good at telling myself that. How Marisol Ibarra died, you mean? His hands tightened around the pistol, not lifting it, just holding it. The way a man holds something he is afraid of dropping. I didn't kill her. I want you to understand that. I didn't touch that slope. He stopped, started again. I just didn't stop it when I could have. Garland handled the contractor. I found out after. And then it was already done, and there wasn't any way back from knowing that and not saying anything. You go along with a silence like that for 1 week, and then a month. And then it's been 18 months, and you've built your whole life on top of it without ever deciding to. That's the part I understand better than you'd think, I said, and I meant it. More than he could have known standing where he was. There's a version of you, I went on, keeping my voice level, keeping it slow, that still gets to choose what happens in the next 5 minutes, even after everything that came before it. That boy doesn't get to lose his father today, on top of everything else he's already lost this week. Let him come to me, and we start figuring out the rest of it from there. Gideon shifted in the corner. I watched him out of the corner of my eye mouth something silent to himself over and over, the way a child does when he has found a rhythm that keeps the fear a little smaller than it would otherwise be. 1, 2, 3. The same counting I had taught him myself years back for thunderstorms and dentist visits and every ordinary fear a small boy accumulates on his way toward being a bigger one. I had never imagined he would need it for this, sitting on a canvas tarp in an abandoned mine shed, while his father decided what to do with a loaded pistol 6 feet away. Corbin followed my glance to the corner, and something in his face changed when he saw what his son was doing, the small moving lips, the counting nobody had told him to do. Whatever that sight cost him, it cost him plainly right there, in front of both of us, and I did not look away from it, because I did not think a man should be allowed to hide from that particular cost. He's not supposed to know how to do that, Corbin said, and his voice had gone very quiet. That counting thing. Where did he learn that? From his mother, I said, who learned it a long time ago for reasons that were never her fault and taught it to her son because she wanted him to have something steady to hold on to when the people who were supposed to keep him steady couldn't. Corbin closed his eyes. When he opened them again, something in his posture had changed, the tension gone out of his shoulders in a way that looked less like calm and more like exhaustion finally winning out over everything else he had been carrying. He looked at his son. He looked at me. Something in his shoulders shifted a second time, not quite a decision yet,
but the shape of one starting to form. The way a hillside starts to move before anyone standing on it understands the ground beneath their feet has already begun to give. "Let him come to me, Corbin," I said again, quieter this time. "You don't have to decide the rest of it right now, just that one thing." His grip on the pistol loosened just slightly. His fingers no longer curled tight around the frame the way they had been since I opened that door. And for the first time since I had stepped into that shed, I let myself believe we might all walk out of it. Corbin looked at his son one more time. Then he looked at me, and whatever he found in my face seemed to take the last of the resistance out of him completely. He set the pistol down on the concrete floor beside the crate carefully, the way you set down something you are finally finished carrying. "Go on, buddy," he said to Gideon, not looking away from me. "Go to Grandpa." Gideon stood. He took 3 steps and stopped, looking back once at his father, the way children look back at the things they are leaving behind, even when leaving is the right thing to do. Corbin was staring at the concrete floor by then, not at either of us, his shoulders rounded forward under a weight that had nothing left to do with the gun he had just set down. "Go on," Corbin said again, softer. Gideon ran. I caught him with one arm and pulled him against my side, and his small hands closed around the back of my jacket with a strength that surprised me every single time. A child does that, the way they hold on with everything they have, even when the danger has already passed. He pressed his face into my ribs. "You smell like sawdust," he said, muffled into the fabric. My throat closed around whatever I might have said back to that. I pressed my lips together and breathed slow through my nose until I trusted my own voice again. "Yeah, buddy," I managed finally. "I know." For a few seconds after that, none of us said anything at all. The wind found the loose sheet metal on the roof again and pushed against it, a long, low groan that filled the whole shed the way sound fills an empty room, and under it there was nothing else. No traffic, no voices, no engines, just that groan and my own heartbeat and the small, steady weight of my grandson against my chest. I held him and did not move and did not speak, because there was nothing that needed saying in that particular handful of seconds. Only the fact of him being there, breathing whole. My hands, when I finally noticed them, were not steady. I had not felt them shake through any of the last 4 days, not at the gate, not in the holding cell, not standing in front of a bank of cameras on my own porch. But they shook now, faintly, holding a 5-year-old boy who was no longer in danger, and it took me longer than I would have liked to admit, standing there in that cold shed with dust still hanging in the light behind me, to get them to stop. Behind me, gravel crunched under tires in the yard outside. Desmond's voice, low, steady, explaining something to someone, with the calm, practiced manner of a man who had done this kind of thing before. 2 cruisers had turned into the access track, moving slow lights off the way vehicles move, when whoever is driving them already understands the worst of the danger has passed, and there is no longer any reason to hurry into it. A 3rd vehicle followed a moment later, unmarked, and I recognized Emmett's sedan pulling in behind the cruisers, though I did not have the space in me right then to wonder how he had gotten word so fast. Corbin had not moved from the crate. When the first officer stepped through the shed door, he put his hands behind his back without being asked, the posture of a man who had already surrendered to something long before anyone arrived to formalize it. He did not resist. He did not look at me as they walked him toward the cruiser. Just before they put him in the back seat, though, he stopped and turned his head, and for a moment he looked at Gideon, still held against my side, looking back at him through the open shed door. Neither of them said a word. Then the officer's hand touched Corbin's shoulder, and he got into the car, and the door closed, and that was the last time for a very long time that my grandson would see his father as a free man. I carried Gideon out to the Silverado and set him in the passenger seat, and he sat there very upright, his feet dangling well above the floor mat, his hands folded in his lap, watching me with the serious, steady eyes of a child who has been through something and is still working out whether it is finally actually over. "Are you hurt anywhere?" I asked, crouching beside the open door so we were at eye level. "Did anyone hurt you?" He shook his head. "Daddy didn't hurt me. He just kept saying stuff on the phone. He was crying." He looked down at his own hands. I didn't know daddies could cry like that. Everyone cries sometimes, buddy, I said. Even daddies, even grandpas, once in a while. He considered that for a moment, the way he considered most things with a seriousness that seemed too large for a boy his size. Are you going to cry, Grandpa? I looked at his face, the gap where a baby tooth had come out the month before, a smudge of something on his chin that might have been breakfast, the collar of his school uniform slightly too big across the shoulders, because his mother had bought it with room for him to grow into. I thought about a 5-year-old boy pushing a dresser in front of a bedroom door because his mother had shown him how. Not right now, I said. Right now, I need to drive you to see your mama. His whole face changed. She's home, I said. She's been waiting for you. He grabbed the seatbelt with both hands and began working it across his lap with the fierce concentration of someone performing a very important task, and I reached in and helped him click it into place. I closed the passenger door, gently checked it was latched, and walked around to the driver's side slowly, giving myself a few extra seconds before I had to be steady enough to drive. I straightened up and looked back at the mine shed one last time at Corbin's empty crate and the pistol 2 officers were photographing on the concrete floor at Emmett standing near the doorway, with his phone already to his ear. And I understood standing there in the cold afternoon light, with my grandson buckled safely into the seat behind me, that whatever the court still had left to decide about what came next, the question that had opened this entire story, whether my grandson and I would walk out of that shed at all, had already answered itself. Emmett called while I was still 10 minutes out on County Road 11. Gideon quiet in the passenger seat beside me, watching the mountains slide past with the particular stillness of a child processing something too large for him to name yet. Garland walked into the district attorney's office an hour ago, Emmett said, voluntarily, requesting a cooperation agreement. He's giving them, Corbin and Vivian both, in exchange for reduced charges on his own involvement in what happened to Marisol Ibarra. His own son, I said. Garland turned on everyone the moment the charges stopped being theoretical. Emmett's voice had the flat, tired quality of a man who had stopped being surprised by people a long time ago and had never quite forgiven himself for it. The DA's office is already drafting the plea framework. 10 to 15 years is my guess, depending on what he actually gives them versus what Corbin's looking at without any deal at all. There's something else, Emmett said before I could ask. The intake officer noted that Garland was wearing an old pocket watch, mining issue, engraved on the back with the family name. First thing he did before signing anything was take it off and set it on the table. Didn't put it back on. Left it sitting there when they walked him out to processing. I did not know what to do with that detail. And I still do not entirely. A man spends 40 years wearing his father's watch like a claim to something honest wears it to charity galas and courthouse hallways, and every occasion where appearing rooted in something solid mattered more than actually being rooted in it. And then, in the 1 hour that mattered most, he sets it down and does not pick it back up. I thought about it the rest of the drive home and never landed anywhere satisfying. I pulled onto Larkspur Road at 4:15 in the afternoon. The garage light was still on, of course it was, and before I had the truck fully stopped, the front door opened and Noreen appeared on the porch, wrapped in the blanket Idella had put around her shoulders that morning, her face doing something that could not be described as any single emotion, because it seemed to be all of them at once. "Mama," Gideon said and let go of my hand the moment I had him out of the truck and ran. I stood on the front path and watched my daughter drop to her knees on the porch and catch her son pulling him against her chest with both arms, her face buried in his hair. She was laughing and crying at the same time, the two sounds running together into something that was neither and both. Idella appeared behind her in the doorway, her eyes wet, her chin trembling, smiling with her whole face in a way I had not seen from her in longer than I wanted to count. I climbed the porch steps. I put my arm around my wife. We stood together in the cold afternoon light and watched our daughter hold her son. And I thought about how many times over the last 4 days I had been afraid I would never see this exact moment happen at all. I want to say something honest here, because the whole point of everything I have told you so far has been honesty, even when it cost me something to give it. Standing on that porch, watching the two of them, I felt something crack open in my chest that had no name precise enough to be useful. And underneath the relief, underneath the gratitude, there was something else that did not go away just because the danger had passed. I had known something was wrong for well over a year. I had seen the long sleeves. I had heard the careful, flattened way Noreen's voice changed on the phone. I had told myself I was overreacting. Told myself she would come to me when she was ready, and every single day I had told myself that was a day I let something continue that I could have interrupted sooner. That particular knowledge did not leave me on that porch. It has not left me since. I do not expect it ever fully will, and there is a part of me that believes it should not. I gave them 3 minutes. Then I carried the whole moment inside with the rest of us, into a kitchen that smelled like soup that had been kept warm on low heat for 2 days running, as though Idella had known the whole time that it would be needed eventually. My phone rang again while Noreen settled Gideon at the table, with a glass of milk and more questions than either of us had answers for yet. Desmond this time. Vivian was picked up at the Holloway estate about 20 minutes ago, he said. Obstruction accessory after the fact on the Ibarra matter, fraud related to the resort's charitable foundation accounts. But there's something you should hear before it hits the news. When they brought her in for questioning, she tried putting the whole thing on Garland, said he'd arranged everything with the contractor on the slope, that she'd only ever known after the fact and been too frightened to say anything. Standard story. Except she got flustered somewhere in the second hour and said something about how she'd handled Dr. Merrow's compensation directly the same as always before her own attorney managed to shut her up. Dr. Merrow, I said. The physician who signed Noreen's intake papers. The same. Which means the person actually running the medical guardianship scheme, arranging the doctor, the false diagnoses, the whole architecture of it, wasn't Garland at all. It was Vivian the entire time. Garland handled the land and the contractor. Corbin handled the fear. Vivian handled the paperwork that would have taken your daughter's life. Apart from the inside, quietly, legally, in a way that never once required anyone to raise their voice. I thought about her voice through that upper window 3 nights before. Precise and controlled, telling me my daughter drank too much and felt sorry for herself. I thought about how completely I had underestimated exactly which member of that family deserved to be feared the most. Where is she now? I asked. Booking. She hasn't said another word since her attorney arrived. Desmond paused. You should know, Garrison, when they walked her out to the car, a couple of the local reporters got a shot of her face. No tears. No performance this time. Just this flat, cold look like she was already calculating what came next. I stood in my own kitchen, my daughter safe at the table beside me. My grandson drinking milk and asking his mother whether the mine shed counted as an adventure. And I understood that the woman most responsible for nearly costing me everything I loved had just been driven away in the back of a police car, without a single tear to spend on any of it. And that this, more than anything else that had happened in 4 days, told me exactly who she had always been. 3 weeks later, I sat in the front row of courtroom 4 at the Gunnison County Courthouse and watched my daughter tell the truth. The room smelled of floor polish and old wood, the particular smell of a building that had been taking testimony from people in this valley for over a century. High windows let in gray November light that fell across the gallery in long, pale bars. Corbin sat at the defense table in a suit that no longer fit him properly. 3 weeks of pretrial detention had taken weight off a man who had not carried much extra to begin with, and the jacket hung loose across his shoulders in a way that made him look like exactly what he was. Diminished. His attorney sat beside him with a face composed into professional neutrality, the expression of a man managing a loss rather than pursuing a victory. I had watched Vivian's trial conclude the week before this one, a shorter affair, mostly documents and a single afternoon of testimony from a forensic accountant who walked the jury through the foundation's books, line by line, until the pattern became impossible to argue with. She had not testified in her own defense,
She had sat through all of it with the same flat, calculating expression Desmond described from the day of her arrest.
And the jury had needed only 90 minutes to convict her on every count. Noreen was on the stand now.
She wore the dark green dress Idella had pressed for her that morning, her hair pulled back, her spine straight in a way that looked like it was costing her something, and that she had decided was worth paying. She had been up there 40 minutes. Her voice had not wavered once.
The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Karen Voss, leaned forward from her table.
Mrs. Halloway, you've described the events surrounding Marisol Ibarra's death in detail. You've told this jury that your husband and his father discussed in advance the need to prevent her from filing her geological report. Is there anything that corroborates your account beyond your own testimony?
Noreen reached into a folder resting on the rail beside her. She produced a phone small, the screen scratched deeply across one corner.
This is my phone, she said. An older model I stopped carrying 2 years ago. My father installed a panic application on it when I first got married. It records audio when activated and uploads automatically to a secure server. She set it on the rail in front of her. I activated it the night I overheard Corbin on a call in the study. I didn't fully understand at the time what I was recording. I understood enough to know I needed to keep it.
The recording is 14 minutes and 11 seconds long, Karen Voss said. A forensic audio analyst has confirmed it is authentic and unaltered, Your Honor. We would like to play the recording for the jury. The audio filled the courtroom. I had heard it once already in Emmett's office 3 days before this. Hearing it here in this room with Corbin sitting 12 feet away with his eyes fixed on the defense table was different. Garland's voice calm and measured in a way that made the content of what he was saying somehow worse than if he had shouted it. Corbin's voice underneath it thin and frightened, asking questions he already seemed to know the answers to. The specific business-like cadence of two men discussing a woman's death the way other men discuss a permitting delay timing terrain, a contractor's name mentioned once and never again. The whole exchange lasting perhaps 90 seconds, and containing within that 90 seconds everything the jury needed to understand about what kind of men had built the family sitting at that defense table. 3 jurors were crying before the recording ended. A fourth, a heavy-set man in the back row who had said almost nothing during jury selection, had his jaw clenched so tight the muscle in his cheek stood out visibly, and I watched him press the back of one hand hard against his mouth for a moment before he brought it back down to his lap. Corbin's attorney did not cross-examine Noreen. There was nothing left to ask that would have helped him, and I think he understood that better than anyone else in the room. Opal Fenwick took the stand after the recess and testified for 26 minutes in the precise, unhurried manner of a woman who had spent decades running a household on a mail carrier's careful schedule and understood that accuracy mattered more than speed. She described what she had witnessed at the Halloway property over 11 years: the driveway confrontation, the boy on the porch step, the finger raised near Noreen's face through an upstairs window. She described her security camera, its angle, its field of view, the make and model with the same precision she might have used describing a recipe she had followed for decades. She described the night she had driven across town in the dark to sit at my kitchen table because she had decided finally that enough was enough. When the defense attorney asked whether she was certain of what she had seen all those years, whether an elderly woman looking out an upstairs window at dusk might not simply be mistaken about what she thought she saw, Opal looked at him over the top of her reading glasses with an expression of polite, absolute disdain. "Young man," she said, "I have watched that street for 11 years.
I know the shape of every vehicle that has ever come up that driveway and every person who has ever gotten out of one. I am entirely certain of what I saw. I only wish I had said so sooner, and I expect I will spend the rest of my life wondering what those 11 years might have looked like if I had."
The jury deliberated for just under 4 hours. I spent most of it on a bench in the courthouse hallway, with Idella's hand in mine, neither of us saying much, watching the light through the tall windows move slowly across the marble floor, the way it must have moved across that same floor for 100 years of families waiting on other verdicts, other outcomes, other pieces of news that would rearrange the rest of their lives one way or the other. Emmett paced. Desmond sat across from us, reading something on his phone he never once looked up from. though I suspected that was less about the phone and more about giving the rest of us a little privacy in a public hallway. When the bailiff came to tell us the jury was ready, my stomach dropped, the way it had dropped standing outside that mine shed door 3 weeks earlier. And I understood, walking back into that courtroom, that some fears do not fully leave a person just because the outcome finally arrives. You carry the shape of them anyway, folded up somewhere behind your ribs, ready to unfold again the next time something you love is put in front of 12 strangers to be decided. Noreen sat very still beside me in the row behind the prosecutor's table. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her eyes were full, but she was not crying, not yet holding herself the way she had held herself through the entire 3 weeks of this. Like someone who had been carrying something enormously heavy for a very long time and was waiting to find out at last whether she would finally be allowed to set it down. The jury filed back into the courtroom at 4:11 in the afternoon, and I have never in my life watched 12 strangers walk anywhere more slowly. The foreman was a woman in her 60s I had noticed during jury selection because she reminded me of Idella in the set of her shoulders. She stood when the judge asked for the verdict, and she read from a single sheet of paper in a voice that did not shake even once. On the count of conspiracy to commit murder, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of obstruction of justice related to the death of Marisol Ibarra, guilty. On all remaining counts as charged, guilty. Idella's hand closed around mine, hard enough to leave a mark. Noreen made a sound beside me that was not quite a word. Both hands pressed flat against her mouth. I sat very still and let it move through me, the whole weight of it all. 4 days that had started with a phone call at 1 in the morning, arriving finally at this single word, repeated over and over by a stranger reading from a sheet of paper. Sentencing followed 2 weeks later. Judge Elena Marshawoman, who had spent 12 years on the family court bench before moving to criminal proceedings and had never once, according to Emmett, played golf with anyone in the Halloway family, handed down the sentences one at a time in a courtroom packed tighter than I had seen it at any point during the trial itself. Reporters filled the back 3 rows. A sketch artist worked quietly near the jury box, her pencil moving in short practice strokes. Corbin received 22 years for conspiracy, obstruction, and the domestic abuse counts, with mandatory minimums under state law, meaning he would serve at least 16 before any possibility of parole. He did not look at anyone when the number was read. Garland's cooperation agreement held reducing his exposure to 12 years eligible for consideration after 8, and I watched him take that number the way a man takes a bill he has known for weeks was coming, with a kind of resigned arithmetic, rather than any visible shock. Vivian, already convicted the week before on the foundation fraud and obstruction charges, received an additional sentence for her role in orchestrating the false medical guardianship scheme, 7 years running consecutive to what she had already been given. The judge noting for the record that Vivian Halloway had shown in the court's assessment the least remorse of the 3 defendants combined. The gavel came down on that final sentence, and the room exhaled the way a room exhales when something that has been building for months finally reaches its ceiling. Before the bailiff dismissed the gallery, Judge Marsh looked out over the courtroom and asked, as is customary in cases involving family impact, whether anyone present wished to make a statement for the record. I had not planned to stand. I want to be honest about that, the same way I have tried to be honest about everything else I have told you. But I found myself on my feet before I had fully decided to be. My hand closed around the small working notebook I still carried in my jacket pocket, the one with 30 years of filing numbers and, more recently, 4 days of dates I would never need written down to remember. Your Honor, I said, I'd like the record to reflect something the state's case never asked me to say, because it isn't a crime, though I've come to believe it should carry a heavier weight in how we think about these things than it currently does. The room went quiet. In the particular way a room goes quiet when it senses something unrehearsed is about to happen. I knew something was wrong with my daughter's marriage for well over a year before any of this came to a head. I saw the long sleeves at a Christmas dinner. I heard the way her voice changed on the phone when her husband was in the room. I told myself I was overreacting. I told myself a father doesn't go looking for trouble in his daughter's marriage unless he's invited to. I was wrong. And my silence cost time we can't get back. Time that might have mattered to a young woman named Marisol Ibarra,
who deserved someone paying closer attention a great deal earlier than anyone in this valley managed to. I looked at Noreen sitting in the front row with her hands folded in her lap. I'm not asking for anything from this court. I'm only saying it because I think silence gets treated in cases like this one as though it's a neutral thing. It isn't. It has a cost same as anything else, and I paid part of that cost, and so did my daughter. And so did the family of a 24-year-old woman named Marisol Ibarra, who buried her a year and a half ago, believing her death was an accident because men in this valley decided that silence served them better than the truth did. I sat back down. Judge Marsh thanked me for the statement without further comment, the way judges do, and moved the proceedings toward their close. But I felt Idela's hand find mine again under the bench, and I felt Noreen lean her shoulder against my arm. And neither of them said anything, because there was nothing that needed saying about it just then. My hand was still closed around the notebook in my jacket pocket, and I realized, sitting there, that I had been gripping it the entire time I was speaking. The way a man grips something he needs to know is still there. We walked out of the Gunnison County Courthouse together an hour later, the four of us. Idela Noreen Gideon holding my hand on one side and his mother's on the other, asking with the particular persistence of a 6-year-old who has decided a question deserves an answer, whether we could get hot chocolate on the way home. The November sky had cleared to a pale, hard blue, the kind that comes to these mountains right before the first real snow of the season, and somewhere behind us, in a building that had just finished deciding the shape of the rest of several lives, the story that had started, with a whispered phone call 3 months earlier, had finally formally come to its end. Emmett shook my hand on the courthouse steps and mentioned something about asset recovery timelines that I heard with about half my attention because Gideon had let go of my hand and was pulling on Noreen's sleeve, asking again about the hot chocolate. And Noreen was laughing, the real laugh, the one that had been coming back to her gradually over the past several weeks, easier and fuller each time it appeared. "Yes," she said, crouching down to his level. "The real kind, with the marshmallows. Absolutely yes." It had not come to its end for me. Not entirely. I understood that walking down those courthouse steps with my whole family around me, understood it the way you understand a permanent fact about the ground you are standing on, the way I used to understand 30 years ago which sections of a survey would hold, and which ones would eventually need correcting no matter how carefully the original stakes had been driven. Some things a man carries long after the courts have finished deciding what to do about them. I have made my peace with that, as much peace as a man in my position is entitled to make. But I want you to understand before I tell you the rest of what I learned, that peace and forgetting are not the same thing, and I have never once in all the months since mistaken one for the other. 6 months later, on a Saturday morning in April, I sat on the back porch on Larkspur Road with a cup of coffee and the particular stillness that comes when everything that needed doing has finally been done. Gideon's bicycle leaned against the fence, training wheels still on, despite his ongoing objections. The garage light was off for the first time in longer than I could remember, because the sun was already up, and Idela had decided without saying so, that some habits get to retire once the reason for them finally does. On the workbench inside the carbide lamp sat cold and clean polished, no longer burning, kept now the way you keep something you love, rather than something you need. People ask me sometimes what I learned from all of this. I learned that silence is not the same thing as peace. For too long I told myself I was respecting my daughter's marriage when the truth was, I was afraid of what asking a real question might cost me. I looked away from long sleeves in December. I accepted the easy explanations. I told myself things would work themselves out, and they did not work themselves out. They got worse quietly behind closed doors while I tended my own life and minded what I told myself was my own business. If something feels wrong with someone you love, ask. Push gently, but push. The cost of an uncomfortable question is nothing compared to the cost of the answer arriving too late. God gave me the time, the health, and the stubbornness to build something worth protecting, and I am grateful for that every single day. I believe, too, that God does not measure a family by the roof over its head or the name on a mailbox, but by the people who leave a light burning every single night without ever once being asked why. I have thanked God more than once in the months since that the phone rang at all that night and that I was still awake to hear it.
If you were me, if you had spent a year noticing something was wrong and told yourself it wasn't your place to ask, what would you have done differently? And when would you have finally done it? I'd like to hear it honestly in the comments below, because I think more of us are carrying that same question than we let on. Quietly, the way I carried mine for far too long. If this story found something true in you, share it with someone who might need to hear it too. And stay close, because there are more stories like this one still to tell.